The helicopter blades cut through the desert air like metal thunder, carrying the wounded SEAL team back to base. Blood pooled on the aircraft floor, mixing dust and sweat into a crimson paste that spoke of another brutal firefight in Afghanistan. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos kept her hands steady as she worked on the worst casualty, a young operator named Jackson whose leg had taken shrapnel from an IED blast. "Stay with me." "Jackson," she whispered, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, applying pressure to stop the bleeding while simultaneously preparing an IV line. The other team members watched her work, their faces masks of pain and exhaustion. They had seen many medics before, but there was something different about Santos. Something in the way she moved, the way she seemed to anticipate the helicopter's movements, the way she never flinched when they hit turbulence. Commander Roberts, the team leader, held a field dressing against his own shoulder wound while observing the new medic. She had joined their unit just 2 weeks ago, transferred from some classified assignment that nobody talked about. Her file was thinner than most, with large sections blacked out. What they did know was that she was the best combat medic they had ever worked with, and in a job where seconds meant the difference between life and death. That reputation mattered more than any background check. "How long until we reach base?" Santos asked the pilot without looking up from her patient. Her hands continued their methodical work, checking vitals, adjusting equipment, making split-second decisions that would determine whether Jackson would walk again. 8 minutes out, came the reply through the headset. Santos nodded and reached for another bag of saline. As she leaned forward, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of what looked like an old scar. It was barely visible, just a thin white line against her tanned skin, but Commander Roberts caught a glimpse of it. Something about that scar nagged at him, though he could not place why. The base appeared on the horizon, a collection of temporary buildings and concrete barriers that represented safety in this hostile land. The helicopter touched down with practiced efficiency, and immediately the organized chaos of a medical emergency took over. Santos coordinated with the base medical team, rattling off Jackson's condition and treatment in rapid-fire medical terminology, while helping transfer him to a stretcher. Possible femoral artery damage, blood loss approximately 800 milliliters. BP stabilized at 90/60. Administered 2 units of plasma en route, she reported to the base surgeon. Her voice never wavered, never showed the stress that would break most people in similar situations. As Jackson was wheeled away to surgery, the rest of the team gathered in the debriefing room. The mission had been a success, but at a cost. They had eliminated a high-value target, but the enemy had been better prepared than intelligence had suggested. The firefight had lasted nearly 6 hours, with the team pinned down in a compound that offered little cover and fewer options for escape. "Santos saved Jackson's life today," Commander Roberts told the group. "If she hadn't been there, we would have lost him in that helicopter." The team nodded in agreement. They had all seen her work under fire, moving between wounded operators while bullets flew overhead. She never seemed to panic, never seemed overwhelmed by the situation. If anything, she appeared more focused when things got dangerous, as if the sound of gunfire somehow sharpened her concentration rather than scattering it. Later that evening, Santos sat alone in the medical tent, checking and rechecking her supplies. It was a ritual she performed after every mission, ensuring that every bandage was in its proper place, every medication properly stored and labeled. The other medics had long since finished their duties and returned to their quarters, but Santos remained, methodically organizing equipment that was already perfectly organized. She pulled out a small, worn photograph from her pocket and stared at it for a long moment. The image showed a group of soldiers in desert camouflage, their faces young and confident. Santos was in the photo, but she looked different somehow. Younger, perhaps, or maybe it was something in her eyes that had changed. She traced her finger along the faces of her former teammates, stopping at each one as if checking off a mental list. A noise outside the tent made her quickly pocket the photograph and return to her work. Corporal Williams, one of the newer SEALs, entered carrying a minor cut on his hand that needed cleaning. "Sorry to bother you, Santos, but the base medic is busy with Jackson," he said, holding up his injured hand. "No problem," she replied, gesturing for him to sit down. As she cleaned and bandaged the wound, Williams studied her face. Like the others, he sensed there was more to their medic than met the eye. "You've done this before," he observed. "I mean, really done this." Not just training, but real combat. Santos paused for just a moment before continuing with the bandage. We all have, she said simply. No, I mean before you came here. You move like someone who's been in the thick of it. My brother's a Marine, did 3 tours in Iraq. He moves the same way you do, like he's always listening for something. She finished securing the bandage and looked up at him. Your hand should be fine in a few days. Keep it clean and dry. Williams recognized the dismissal but pressed on anyway. The guys have been wondering about your previous assignment. Nobody seems to know where you came from. Santos began cleaning up her supplies, her movements careful and deliberate. Sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions, she said quietly. In this business, there are things that are classified for good reasons. As Williams left the tent, Santos returned to her solitary routine. Outside, the desert wind carried the sounds of the base settling in for the night. Guard towers monitored the perimeter. Generators hummed steadily, and somewhere in the distance, another helicopter was landing with another group of operators returning from another mission. She thought about Jackson, probably lying in surgery at that very moment. The young SEAL reminded her of someone she used to know, someone whose face appeared in that worn photograph she kept hidden. The memory brought with it a familiar ache, the kind of pain that never fully healed but could be managed, compartmentalized, and pushed aside when duty called. Tomorrow would bring another mission, another chance to put her skills to use in service of her teammates. But tonight, alone in the medical tent with only her thoughts and her carefully organized supplies, Maria Santos allowed herself a moment to remember who she used to be before she became the quiet, efficient medic that everyone respected but no one really knew. 3 days after the helicopter incident, Commander Roberts found himself watching Santos during morning PT. The entire team ran together at dawn, a tradition that built unity and maintained the physical standards required for their dangerous work. Santos kept pace easily, her breathing controlled and her stride efficient. She ran like someone who had been doing it for years, not just the regulation fitness required of medical personnel. During weapons maintenance later that morning, Roberts noticed something else. When Petty Officer Martinez was struggling to reassemble his rifle after cleaning, Santos glanced over and made a small adjustment to his technique. The movement was so quick and natural that most people would have missed it, but Roberts had been leading special operations teams for over a decade. He knew the difference between someone who had been taught weapon maintenance and someone who had lived with weapons as daily tools. Santos, he called out after the session ended, walk with me. They strolled toward the perimeter of the base where concrete barriers and razor wire marked the boundary between safety and the hostile world beyond. The Afghan sun was already climbing high, promising another day of scorching heat that would test everyone's endurance. How's Jackson doing? Roberts asked, though he already knew the answer. He had checked on the young SEAL that morning. Surgery went well. He'll keep the leg, but it'll be months before he's operational again, Santos replied. The surgeon said if we had been 10 minutes later getting him here, the outcome would have been very different. Roberts nodded, then stopped walking and turned to face her. I've been in this business for 15 years, Santos. I've worked with a lot of medics, and you're different. She met his gaze steadily, waiting for him to continue. Yesterday, during the firefight, you moved like someone who knew exactly where the enemy positions were without being told. You anticipated their fire patterns, knew when to move and when to stay down. That's not something they teach in medical school. Santos remained silent, her expression neutral. I've been doing some thinking, Roberts continued, about that scar on your arm, about the way you handle yourself under fire, about those classified sections in your personnel file. I think you weren't always a medic. The desert wind picked up, swirling dust around their feet. In the distance, another helicopter was approaching the base, its rotors beating a familiar rhythm that had become the soundtrack of their deployment. With respect, sir, my previous assignments are classified, Santos said finally. I'm here to do a job, and I believe I'm doing it well. You are, Roberts agreed. Better than well. But I'm responsible for this team, and that means I need to know who I'm working with. If you have combat experience that could help us, I need to know about it. If you have history that could put us at risk, I need to know about that too. Santos looked out toward the desert, where heat waves shimmered like ghosts above the sand. Somewhere out there, enemy fighters were planning their next attack, studying intelligence reports, preparing weapons and explosives for another confrontation with American forces. I was a different person in my previous assignment, she said quietly. That person doesn't exist anymore. Before Roberts could respond, his radio crackled to life. Command to Team 6, immediate briefing in 20 minutes. Priority Alpha. Priority Alpha meant combat mission. Roberts acknowledged the transmission and looked back at Santos. But the moment for personal conversation had passed. They had a job to do. The briefing room filled quickly with the familiar faces of Team 6. Intelligence officers spread maps and satellite photos across the table while the team gathered around. Their expressions focused and professional. Santos took her position at the back of the room, where medics traditionally stood during mission briefings. "Gentlemen and lady," the intelligence officer began, nodding toward Santos. "We have a situation developing 40 kilometers northeast of here. A convoy carrying humanitarian supplies was ambushed 6 hours ago. The attackers have taken the survivors to a compound in the mountains, and satellite imagery suggests they're planning to execute the hostages tomorrow morning." The satellite photos showed a remote compound built into a rocky hillside, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. Red circles marked guard positions, while yellow squares indicated possible locations where hostages might be held. "This is a time-sensitive rescue operation," the officer continued. "Intel suggests 15 to 20 enemy fighters, armed with small arms and possibly RPGs. The terrain is challenging, with limited approach routes and excellent defensive positions for the enemy." Robert studied the photos carefully. "What about the hostages? How many and what condition?" 4 aid workers, including 2 Americans. "We lost contact after the initial ambush, but drone surveillance shows movement in the compound that suggests at least some survivors." Santos stepped forward slightly to get a better view of the photos. As she studied the compound layout, something in her posture changed. Her breathing slowed, her eyes focused with laser intensity, and she began analyzing the images with the systematic approach of someone who had done this many times before. "The medical situation could be complicated," she said, speaking directly to Roberts. "If they've been held for 6 hours after an ambush, we have to assume injuries. Dehydration in this heat, possible shock, maybe gunshot wounds if they were hit during the initial attack." Roberts noticed how naturally she shifted into tactical thinking. "What else do you see?" Santos pointed to one of the buildings. "This structure here, it's positioned to give the guards a clear view of all approach routes, but it also isolates it from the other buildings. If they're keeping the hostages there, it might be possible to reach them without alerting the entire compound." The intelligence officer looked surprised. "That's actually a very good tactical observation. Are you sure you're just a medic?" Before Santos could answer, Roberts intervened. "She's our medic and a damn good one. What matters right now is getting those hostages out alive." The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering extraction routes, communication protocols, and contingency plans. Santos listened carefully but said nothing more, though Roberts noticed she continued studying the satellite photos with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail. As the team prepared to gear up, Roberts pulled Santos aside one more time. "I don't know what your story is," he said quietly, "but I can see you've been in situations like this before. If there's anything at all from your previous experience that could help us bring those hostages home safely, I need you to speak up." Santos was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor of the briefing room. When she looked up, something had changed in her eyes. The careful neutrality was gone, replaced by something harder and more determined. "Give me 5 minutes to check my medical supplies," she said. "And, Commander, make sure everyone has extra ammunition. Something about this compound feels wrong, and I have a feeling we're going to need every round we can carry." As she walked away to prepare her equipment, Roberts watched her go with growing certainty that Maria Santos was far more than just a medic. The question was whether her hidden past would be an asset or a liability when bullets started flying in just a few hours. The helicopter dropped them 2 kilometers from the target compound under cover of darkness. The desert air was surprisingly cold at night, a sharp contrast to the blazing heat of the day. Team 6 moved through the rocky terrain like shadows, their night vision equipment turning the landscape into a green-tinted world of rocks and scrub brush. Santos carried her medical pack along with standard combat gear, but Roberts noticed she had also requisitioned additional ammunition and a backup sidearm. For a medic, she was heavily armed. More importantly, she moved through the terrain with the same silent efficiency as the rest of the team, never stumbling on loose rocks or getting caught on thorny bushes that seemed to grab at everyone else's equipment. "Overwatch position in sight," whispered Martinez through the radio. He had taken point, leading them toward a ridge that would provide a clear view of the compound. The team followed in single file, maintaining spacing and communication discipline that had been drilled into them through countless training exercises. As they climbed toward the ridge, Santos suddenly held up her hand in the universal signal to stop. The entire team froze, weapons ready, scanning for threats. Roberts moved up beside her, wondering what she had detected that the rest of them had missed. "Listen," she whispered, so quietly he had to strain to hear her. Roberts focused his hearing, filtering out the sound of wind through rocks and the distant hum of generators from the compound. Then he heard it. Voices speaking in a local dialect getting closer. Someone was coming up the same path they were using. Without waiting for orders, Santos melted into the shadows beside a large boulder, her weapon ready. The rest of the team followed her lead, disappearing into whatever cover they could find. Roberts counted 3 distinct voices, probably a patrol checking the approaches to the compound. The enemy patrol appeared around a bend in the path, 3 fighters carrying AK-47s and walking with the casual confidence of people who believed they were safe in their own territory. They were talking among themselves, their voices carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. Santos remained perfectly still as the patrol passed within arm's reach of her position. Roberts watched her through his night vision scope, impressed by her discipline. Many soldiers would have been tempted to engage the patrol immediately, but Santos understood that patience was often more valuable than aggression. After the patrol moved past and disappeared into the darkness, the team regrouped and continued toward the overwatch position. But now Roberts knew they were dealing with an enemy that was more alert and organized than the intelligence briefing had suggested. 3-man patrols on regular intervals, Santos whispered when they reached the ridge. "That suggests better discipline and command structure than we expected." Roberts nodded, studying the compound through his binoculars. The buildings were dark except for a few windows that showed dim light, probably from oil lamps or candles. Guards were visible at several positions, and now that they knew to look for them, they could see the patrol routes that covered all the major approaches. "Target building is there." Roberts pointed to the structure Santos had identified during the briefing. "Guards on the roof, but the approach from the northeast looks feasible." Santos studied the compound layout, then pulled out a small notepad and began sketching. Roberts watched her work, noting the way she marked not just the buildings and guard positions, but also probable fields of fire, dead space where they could move undetected, and what looked like escape routes. "You've done this before," he said quietly. It was not a question. She looked up from her sketch, meeting his eyes in the green glow of night vision equipment. "Yes," she said simply, "but not as a medic." Before Roberts could respond, movement in the compound caught their attention. A door opened in the target building, and 2 guards emerged, dragging someone between them. Even at this distance, it was clear the person was injured and having difficulty walking. "Hostage," Martinez whispered. "They're moving one of them." Santos raised her binoculars and focused on the scene. Male, approximately 6 feet tall, favoring his right leg. Possible gunshot wound or severe impact injury. They're taking him to the main building. The guards disappeared into another structure, leaving the team with a new complication. The hostages were no longer all in one location, which would make the rescue significantly more difficult. "We need to revise the plan," Roberts said. "Santos, what's your assessment of the medical situation?" She was quiet for a moment, still studying the compound. "If they moved him, either he's getting worse and they're trying to provide medical attention, or they're separating him for interrogation. Given the rough way they handled him, I doubt they're concerned about his medical needs." Roberts felt his stomach tighten. Interrogation in this part of the world rarely ended well for prisoners. Time factor just became critical, he decided. "We go in fast and hard, secure all hostages simultaneously. Santos, I want you with the entry team, not hanging back in a support role." She looked surprised. "Sir, my job is medical support, not assault operations." "Your job is whatever I need it to be to bring those people home alive," Roberts replied firmly. "And right now, I need someone who knows how to move under fire and can provide immediate medical care if we have wounded hostages." Santos stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understood, sir." As the team prepared for the assault, Roberts noticed Santos checking her weapon with the systematic thoroughness of an experienced combat soldier. She verified her ammunition count, tested her radio, and adjusted her equipment for optimal weight distribution. These were not the actions of someone whose primary training was medical. Team 6, this is Overwatch, came a voice through their radios. Drone surveillance shows increase in activity around the compound. Looks like they might be preparing to move again. Roberts cursed silently. If the enemy relocated the hostages, finding them again could take days they did not have. All teams, we are green for immediate assault, he announced. Santos, you're with me on primary entry. Martinez and Williams take the side building. Peterson provides overwatch and covers our extraction. The team began moving down from the ridge, using the cover of darkness and their knowledge of the guard patrol schedule to approach the compound. Santos moved beside Roberts, her medical pack supplemented with combat gear that she handled with obvious familiarity. As they reached the outer perimeter of the compound, Santos suddenly grabbed Roberts' arm and pointed toward a section of wall that looked identical to every other section. There, she whispered. That's where we go in. Roberts studied the wall section she had indicated. It looked like every other part of the perimeter, but something in Santos's voice convinced him she knew what she was talking about. Why there? Dead space from the guard towers, no direct line of sight from the main building, and the wall construction is older there. Less likely to have motion sensors or other security devices. Roberts stared at her. That level of tactical analysis was not something they taught medics, no matter how advanced their training. Santos, he whispered as they prepared to breach the compound. When this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about your background. She met his eyes one last time before they crossed into enemy territory. If we both survive this, Commander, I'll tell you everything you want to know. Then they were moving, crossing the open ground toward the compound wall, committed to a mission that would either save 4 innocent lives or cost them their own. The breach went exactly as Santos had predicted. The section of wall she had identified crumbled under a small explosive charge with minimal noise, creating an opening just large enough for the team to slip through one at a time. Roberts went first, weapon ready, scanning for immediate threats. Santos followed, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had done this many times before. The interior of the compound was a maze of narrow alleys between buildings, with clotheslines and cooking equipment creating additional obstacles and concealment. Santos immediately oriented herself, pointing toward the building where they had seen the injured hostage being taken. Her movement was so confident that Roberts realized she had memorized the entire layout from their observation point. They moved in tactical formation, communicating through hand signals that Santos seemed to understand as well as any special operations veteran. When they reached the first corner, she signaled for Roberts to wait, then slipped forward to check the angle around the building. The way she moved, low and fast with her weapon in perfect position, was definitely not something they taught medical personnel. Clear, she whispered, waving him forward. They reached the target building without encountering any guards. Through a small window, they could see dim light and hear voices speaking in the local language. Santos listened for a moment, then turned to Roberts with a grim expression. 3 hostages in there, 1 American woman, 2 local aid workers. The American is asking about medical attention for someone named David. Roberts was impressed by her language skills, but there was no time to ask questions. Through his radio, he could hear Martinez and Williams approaching the second building where the injured hostage had been taken. Team 2 in position, came Martinez's whispered report. Visual on 1 hostage, male, appears to be in poor condition. Santos immediately shifted her focus to her medical equipment, checking supplies and preparing for multiple casualties. Commander, based on the timeline and what we observed, we're probably looking at dehydration, possible infection from untreated wounds, and potential head trauma. I need to reach the injured hostage first. Roberts hesitated. Standard protocol called for securing all hostages simultaneously, to prevent the enemy from using some as leverage against others. But Santos's medical assessment made sense, and time was critical for serious injuries. Negative, he decided. We stick to the plan. Simultaneous breach, secure all hostages at once. Santos looked like she wanted to argue, but discipline won out. Understood, sir. All teams prepare for coordinated breach on my mark, Roberts whispered into his radio. He counted down from 5, giving everyone time to get into position. Mark. The assault began with flashbang grenades thrown through windows of both buildings. The sudden light and sound would disorient anyone inside for precious seconds, giving the SEALs time to enter and control the situation before the enemy could react. Roberts kicked in the door of their target building and rushed inside, Santos right behind him. 3 figures huddled in the corner were obviously the hostages, while 2 armed guards stumbled around, temporarily blinded and deafened by the grenades. Santos moved left while Roberts went right, their coordination so smooth it looked choreographed. The first guard was down before he could raise his weapon, dropped by a precise 3-round burst from Santos's rifle. The second guard was trying to aim at Roberts when Santos put 2 rounds center mass, dropping him instantly. Roberts stared at her in amazement. Those were not lucky shots or desperate medical personnel defending patients. Those were the precise professional shots of a trained combat soldier. "Hostages secure," he reported while Santos immediately moved to check on the 3 aid workers. The American woman was conscious but dehydrated, while the 2 local workers appeared to be in shock but uninjured. "Team 2, report," Roberts called into his radio. "Building secure? 1 hostage recovered," came Martinez's voice. "But Santos needs to get here fast. This guy is in bad shape." Santos was already moving, grabbing her medical pack and heading for the door. "Keep them hydrated, small sips of water only," she called back to Roberts as she rushed toward the other building. Roberts followed, still trying to process what he had just witnessed. Santos had moved and shot like a veteran special operations soldier, not a medic who had been thrust into a combat situation. Her weapon handling, tactical movement, and target engagement were all textbook perfect. They reached the second building to find Martinez and Williams standing guard over an unconscious man in his 30s. Even in the dim light, it was clear he was in serious trouble. His breathing was shallow and rapid, his skin pale and clammy, and there was dried blood on his shirt that suggested internal injuries. Santos dropped to her knees beside him and immediately began her assessment. Her hands moved quickly and professionally, checking pulse, breathing, looking for obvious injuries while simultaneously preparing an IV line. "Possible internal bleeding. Signs of shock, probable concussion," she reported while working. "He needs surgery within the hour or we're going to lose him." "How long can you keep him stable?" Roberts asked. "Maybe 30 minutes if I can get fluids into him and manage the bleeding. But that's optimistic." Roberts made a quick decision. "Martinez, call for immediate medical evacuation. Tell them we have a critical casualty that cannot wait for regular extraction." While Martinez coordinated with base, Santos continued working on the injured hostage. Roberts watched her hands, noting the confidence and skill that came only from extensive practice. She was not just a good medic. She was an exceptional trauma surgeon working under battlefield conditions. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked quietly while she worked. Santos glanced up at him briefly. "Forward surgical teams," she said simply. "Different assignment, different war. And the weapons training?" "The tactical movement." She paused in her work for just a moment. "When you're operating forward of the main lines, everyone needs to know how to fight. Medics don't get a pass just because they're trying to save lives." Roberts was starting to understand. Forward surgical teams operated in the most dangerous areas of combat zones, often with minimal security and constant threat of attack. Anyone assigned to those teams would need combat training that went far beyond basic military medicine. "Incoming helicopter in 5 minutes," Martinez reported. "They're bringing a full trauma team to stabilize him for transport." Santos nodded without looking up from her patient. "He'll make it," she said with quiet confidence. "But it's going to be close." As they waited for the medical evacuation, Roberts found himself studying Santos with new understanding. The classified sections in her personnel file, the combat skills, the advanced medical training, and the way she seemed to know exactly what to do in any dangerous situation all painted a picture of someone who had served in the most dangerous assignments the military had to offer. The helicopter landed outside the compound, and Santos coordinated the patient transfer with the incoming medical team. As they loaded the injured hostage for transport, she provided a rapid but thorough medical briefing that impressed even the trauma surgeons. "Nice work," the lead surgeon told her as they prepared to take off. "You probably saved his life with that field treatment." Santos nodded acknowledgement but said nothing. As the helicopter disappeared into the darkness, she gathered her equipment and prepared for the extraction of the remaining team and hostages. "Santos," Roberts said as they waited for their own transport. "That conversation I mentioned? It just became a lot more important." She looked at him with eyes that held years of experience and more than a few painful memories. "I figured it would, sir. Some secrets are harder to keep than others." 2 days after the hostage rescue, Robert sat across from Santos in a secure briefing room at the base. The rescued aid workers had been evacuated to Germany, with the injured man surviving surgery and expected to make a full recovery. The mission was being hailed as a complete success, but Roberts needed answers about his medic's mysterious background. "I've been making some calls," Roberts began, placing a thick folder on the table between them. "Turns out your personnel file has more classifications than most CIA operatives, but I managed to get some information through back channels." Santos sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She had changed from her combat gear into standard utility uniform, but something about her posture still suggested she was ready for action at any moment. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, originally assigned to the 75th Ranger Regiment as a combat medic, Roberts read from the folder. Deployed to Iraq in 2018, Afghanistan in 2019, transferred to Classified Special Operations Unit in 2020. Assignment details redacted. He looked up at her. "That's where the trail goes cold for 2 years. No duty stations, no performance evaluations, no record of where you were or what you were doing. Then suddenly you appear on a medical transport in Germany, with a chest full of medals you're not allowed to wear and orders, transferring you to my team." Santos met his gaze, steadily but remained silent. "The interesting part," Roberts continued, "is what happened right before your classified assignment. According to the records I could access, your Ranger unit was ambushed during a humanitarian mission. Half your team was killed, including your squad leader and best friend, Corporal Jennifer Hayes." At the mention of Jennifer's name, something flickered across Santos's face. Pain, quickly suppressed but unmistakable. "After that incident, you volunteered for a classified program. No details available, but the timing suggests it was related to what happened to your team." Roberts closed the folder and leaned forward. "I think you were part of a deep cover operation, probably infiltrating enemy networks or conducting long-term reconnaissance in hostile territory. And I think something went very wrong." Santos was quiet for a long moment, staring at the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Jennifer was more than my best friend. She was my sister in every way that mattered. We went through basic training together, Ranger school together, deployed together twice." She looked up at Roberts. "When she died, I wanted revenge more than I wanted to keep breathing." Roberts waited, sensing she needed time to find the words. The classified program was called Operation Silent Thunder. Deep penetration missions behind enemy lines, sometimes for months at a time. We posed as aid workers, journalists, even refugees. The goal was to identify high-value targets and gathering intelligence that conventional forces couldn't reach. She stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over the base. "I was good at it. Maybe too good. I could blend in, speak the languages, understand the culture well enough to move freely in areas where any other American would be shot on sight." "How long were you operational?" 18 months. 7 different missions, ranging from 2 weeks to 4 months in duration. We eliminated dozens of high-value targets, disrupted supply networks, saved American lives by providing intelligence that prevented attacks. Roberts could hear something in her voice that suggested the story was about to take a darker turn. "The last mission was supposed to be routine," Santos continued. "Infiltrate a refugee camp that intelligence suspected was being used to hide terrorist operatives. Identify the bad actors, gather evidence, call in surgical strikes to eliminate them without harming innocent civilians." She turned back to face him. But intelligence was wrong. It wasn't a few terrorists hiding among refugees. The entire camp was a front for a major terrorist training operation. Men, women, even children were being trained to carry out attacks across Europe and America. Roberts felt his stomach tighten. "What happened?" "My cover was blown on day 3. Someone recognized me from a previous mission, or maybe I made a mistake. Doesn't matter. What matters is that suddenly I was alone in a camp full of people who wanted to torture me for information before they killed me." Santos sat back down, her hands clasped tightly together. "I fought my way out. Killed 17 people in the process, including 3 who were probably just refugees in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I also discovered plans for a coordinated attack on American schools that would have killed hundreds of children. You stopped the attack? I called in airstrikes on the entire camp. 67 confirmed kills, including the leadership of a terrorist cell that had been planning attacks for over a year." Her voice was flat, emotionless. I also killed at least a dozen people who were probably innocent. Roberts began to understand why someone with Santos's record would be transferred to a conventional medical position. The psychological toll of that kind of operation would be enormous. The debriefing took 6 months, Santos continued. Psychiatrists, intelligence officers, congressional committees. Everyone wanted to know if I had gone rogue, if I could be trusted, if I was mentally stable enough to continue serving. And their conclusion? Officially, I was cleared of any wrongdoing. The attack I prevented would have been catastrophic, and my actions were deemed necessary and proportionate. Santos paused, her jaw tightening. Unofficially, I was considered too dangerous for further deep cover work, too willing to make hard choices, too comfortable with violence when necessary. Robert studied her face, seeing the weight of those decisions in her eyes. So they transferred you to medical duty. Reassigned to save lives instead of taking them, she confirmed. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved, but my medical training was real, and trauma surgery was something I could do without having to decide who lived and who died. Until you joined my team. Santos looked directly at him. I came here to be a medic, Commander. Nothing more. I wanted to use my skills to keep good people alive, not to kill bad people. I thought I could leave that other life behind. But you can't, Roberts observed. It's still there in the way you move, the way you think, the way you handle weapons. You're not just a medic who happens to have combat training. You're a special operations soldier who happens to have medical training. She was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. During the hostage rescue, when I saw those guards threatening innocent people, I didn't think about medical ethics or rules of engagement. I just reverted to what I was trained to do. And you did it flawlessly, Roberts said. Those shots you took were perfect. Military precision under extreme stress. That's what scares me, Santos admitted. I came here to heal people, but the moment violence started, I became something else. Someone else. The person I was trying to leave behind. Roberts leaned back in his chair, processing everything he had learned. Santos wasn't just a medic with an unusual background. She was potentially one of the most experienced special operations soldiers he had ever worked with. Someone who had operated alone behind enemy lines for months at a time and survived situations that would have killed most soldiers. The question now, he said carefully, is what do we do with this information? I have a team that depends on knowing who they're working with, but I also have someone whose skills could be invaluable in the right situations. Santos met his gaze. I won't lie to the team, but I also won't volunteer information that might change how they see me. These men respect me as their medic. If they start thinking of me as some kind of special operations ghost, it could affect unit cohesion. Fair enough, Roberts agreed. But I need to know. If we get into another situation like the hostage rescue, can I count on you to use whatever skills are necessary to bring everyone home safely? Santos was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the decision. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and determined. Jennifer Hayes died because we weren't prepared for the level of violence we encountered. Since then, I've promised myself that I would never let good people die if I had the skills to save them. She looked directly at Roberts. If this team needs a medic, I'll be the best medic they've ever had. If they need a soldier, I'll be that too. Whatever it takes to bring everyone home. Roberts nodded, satisfied with her answer. There's one more thing. The team has been asking questions about your background. They're not stupid, and they noticed your performance during the rescue operation. What do you want me to tell them? Santos thought about it. Tell them the truth, but not all of it. I was assigned to special operations units before joining this team. I have more combat experience than most medics, but the details of my previous missions remain classified. They'll accept that, Roberts agreed. SEALs understand operational security better than most. As Santos prepared to leave the briefing room, Robert stopped her with one final question. Do you regret it? The classified missions, the choices you had to make? She paused at the door, considering the question. I regret that the world is a place where those choices were necessary. I regret that innocent people died because of decisions I made. But I don't regret preventing attacks that would have killed children. And I don't regret eliminating people who dedicated their lives to causing suffering. She turned to face him one last time. What I regret most is that Jennifer never got the chance to see the good that came from all that violence. She died believing we were just another failed mission. I'd give anything to tell her that her sacrifice actually meant something. After Santos left, Robert sat alone in the briefing room, staring at the classified folder that told only part of Maria Santos's story. He had asked for answers about his team's medic, and instead he had discovered that he was working with one of the most experienced covert operatives the military had ever produced. The question now was whether that knowledge would make his team stronger, or create complications he wasn't prepared to handle. Only time would tell if Maria Santos could truly leave her past behind, or if the violence that had shaped her would eventually surface again when they needed it most. 3 weeks after Roberts learned the truth about Santos's background, Team 6 found themselves facing their most dangerous mission yet. Intelligence had identified a terrorist compound deep in the mountains where American prisoners were being held. But this wasn't a simple hostage rescue. The enemy had learned from previous raids and had fortified their position with sophisticated defenses and early warning systems. The briefing room was tense as the intelligence officer laid out satellite photos that showed a complex built into a mountainside, with multiple levels connected by tunnels and protected by overlapping fields of fire. Unlike previous missions, this target would require a multi-day approach through hostile territory, with no possibility of immediate reinforcement if things went wrong. Estimate 40 to 50 enemy fighters, the officer explained, pointing to various defensive positions. They have heavy weapons, including mortars and possibly anti-aircraft missiles. The terrain makes helicopter insertion impossible, so you'll need to approach on foot through this valley system. Robert studied the maps with growing concern. This wasn't the type of quick strike mission his team specialized in. It was more like the extended operations that Special Forces units trained for, requiring skills in long-range reconnaissance, survival, and sustained combat operations. "What's the timeline?" he asked. 72 hours from insertion to extraction. The prisoners are being held here. The officer pointed to a building deep within the complex. But intelligence suggests they may be moved again soon. This could be our only opportunity. As the briefing continued, Roberts noticed Santos paying particular attention to the terrain maps and defensive layouts. She was taking notes, but her sketches looked more like tactical planning diagrams than medical preparation notes. After the briefing ended and the team began preparing their equipment, Roberts pulled Santos aside. "This is going to be different from our previous missions," he said quietly. "Extended time in hostile territory, sustained combat, minimal support. I need to know if you're prepared for that level of operations." Santos looked at him with the steady gaze he had come to recognize as her combat mindset. "I've spent 4 months alone in similar terrain, Commander. I can handle 3 days with a full team." "That's not what I'm asking," Roberts pressed. "I'm asking if you're ready to be more than just a medic on this mission. Because looking at those defenses and that terrain, I think we're going to need every combat skill available." Santos was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with the implications of what he was suggesting. Finally, she nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" Robert spread out the tactical maps on a nearby table. "I want your assessment of this compound based on your previous experience. Not as a medic, but as someone who has operated against similar targets." Santos studied the satellite photos with the intensity she had shown during previous missions, but this time she didn't hide her tactical analysis. Her finger traced possible approach routes, identified key defensive positions, and noted vulnerabilities that the intelligence briefing had missed. "They've learned from our previous raids," she said after several minutes. "The defensive positions are designed specifically to counter SEAL tactics. Overlapping fields of fire, multiple escape routes for the defenders, and the high ground gives them significant advantages." "How would you approach it?" Santos pointed to a section of the map that showed a steep ravine leading up the mountainside. "Conventional wisdom says this approach is too difficult and exposed, but that's exactly why they won't expect it. The terrain is challenging enough that they probably don't have sensors or regular patrols covering it." Roberts looked at the ravine she had indicated. It was almost vertical in some places, with loose rock that would make climbing treacherous and noisy. "That's a hell of a climb, especially with full gear." "I've done worse," Santos said simply. "And if we can get above their main defensive line, we can approach the prisoner holding area from an angle they're not prepared to defend." As Robert studied her suggested approach, he realized she was right. It was dangerous and physically demanding, but it offered their best chance of reaching the prisoners without fighting through layer after layer of prepared defenses. "There's something else," Santos continued. "These mountain compounds usually have escape tunnels leading to secondary positions. If we assault the main complex, they'll probably try to move the prisoners through those tunnels to a backup location. How do we prevent that? Santos traced her finger along the satellite image, indicating several areas where the terrain formed natural choke points. Small teams positioned here and here could cut off the most likely escape routes. But it would mean splitting our force, which increases risk for everyone. Roberts nodded, recognizing the tactical dilemma. Keeping the team together provided maximum firepower for the assault, but left the enemy free to escape with the prisoners. Splitting up increased their chances of preventing escape, but left each element vulnerable if they encountered stronger resistance than expected. What would you recommend? Santos looked up at him. Based on my experience with similar targets, I'd recommend a 3-element approach. Primary assault team hits the main complex, drawing attention and forcing them to commit their defenders. Second element cuts off the main escape route here. She pointed to a narrow valley, while a third element provides overwatch and sniper support from this ridge. Robert studied her plan, impressed by its sophistication. This wasn't basic tactics. It was the kind of complex operational planning that Special Forces officers spent years learning to develop. Where would you position yourself in this plan? Santos hesitated, clearly understanding that her answer would determine her role for the entire mission. Wherever you need me most, Commander. But if I'm being honest, the sniper position offers the best opportunity to provide both medical support and tactical overwatch for the entire operation. Roberts looked at her with new understanding. You're qualified as a sniper? Among other things, she admitted. Long-range reconnaissance requires multiple skill sets. As the team gathered for final mission preparation, Roberts made his decision. Change of plans, he announced to the group. We're going to approach this as a complex operation with multiple elements. Santos will provide sniper overwatch from the high ground, while the rest of us execute a coordinated assault. Martinez looked surprised. Sir, Santos is our medic. Shouldn't she be with the assault team in case of casualties? Roberts glanced at Santos, who nodded slightly. Santos has additional qualifications that make her ideal for the overwatch position. She can provide both sniper support and coordinate medical evacuation if needed. The team accepted the explanation without further questions, though Roberts could see curiosity in their expressions. They had all noticed Santos's unusual skills during previous missions, and this assignment would only reinforce their suspicions that their medic was more than she appeared to be. As they prepared to depart for the mission, Santos approached Roberts privately. Once the team sees me in a sniper role, there won't be any hiding what I really am, she said quietly. Roberts nodded. Are you ready for that? Santos looked out toward the mountains where they would soon be operating, her expression thoughtful. Jennifer always said that the hardest part of our job wasn't the missions themselves, but living with who we had to become to complete them. She turned back to Roberts. I think it's time to stop pretending to be someone I'm not. As the helicopter lifted off carrying Team 6 toward their most dangerous mission yet, Roberts reflected on how much his understanding of his team had changed. What had started as curiosity about his medic's background had revealed that he was working with one of the most experienced special operations soldiers he had ever encountered. The question now was whether Maria, Santos's hidden skills would be enough to bring everyone home safely from a mission that was already testing the limits of what even elite special operations forces could accomplish. The mission began exactly as Santos had predicted. The approach through the steep ravine was brutal, requiring nearly 6 hours of careful climbing through loose rock and narrow passages. But her assessment of the terrain proved accurate. They encountered no enemy patrols or surveillance equipment during the ascent. By dawn, Santos had positioned herself on the Overwatch Ridge with a clear view of the entire compound. Through her sniper scope, she could see the defensive positions that had been invisible in the satellite photos, including several machine gun nests and mortar positions that would have devastated a conventional assault. Overwatch in position, she reported through her radio. Count 12 enemy fighters visible, probable additional personnel inside buildings. Confirmed prisoner holding area shows signs of recent activity. Roberts and the assault team had reached their staging area below the compound, using the cover Santos had identified in her planning. Martinez and Williams were in position to cut off the main escape route, reporting negative contact with enemy forces. Beginning final approach, Roberts whispered into his radio. The next few minutes would determine whether Santos's tactical analysis had been correct or whether they were walking into a carefully prepared trap. Through her scope, Santos watched the assault team move through the approach she had mapped out. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger of her rifle, ready to provide covering fire if they were detected. The compound remained quiet, with only routine guard movement visible at the defensive positions. Then everything went wrong. Contact front. Martinez's voice exploded through the radio. Multiple enemy fighters moving through the escape route. "We're taking heavy fire!" Santos swung her scope toward Martinez's position and immediately saw the problem. A large group of enemy fighters was attempting to escape through the very route she had predicted, but there were far more of them than intelligence had suggested. Martinez and Williams were outnumbered 3-1 and pinned down behind inadequate cover. Overwatch has visual on approximately 15 enemy fighters engaging Team 2. Santos reported while acquiring her first target. Engaging now. Her first shot dropped the enemy fighter who appeared to be leading the group. The second shot eliminated a machine gunner who was pouring fire into Martinez's position. But even with sniper support, the two SEALs were still badly outnumbered. "Team 1, can you provide support to Team 2? Santos called to Roberts. "Negative, we're committed to the assault. Prisoner building is fortified and we're taking casualties. Peterson is down with leg wounds." Santos felt the familiar cold clarity that had sustained her through 18 months of covert operations. The mission was falling apart with multiple teams in contact and casualties mounting. Someone needed to make decisions that would save lives, even if those decisions meant revealing capabilities she had hoped to keep hidden. "Team 2, maintain position," she ordered, knowing that Martinez would follow her instructions even though she was technically just a medic. "I'm moving to provide close support." She gathered her equipment and began moving down from the ridge, using terrain features to approach Martinez's position while maintaining radio contact with both teams. Her movement was swift and sure, covering ground that would have taken most soldiers twice as long to traverse. "Overwatch, what's your status?" Roberts called through the radio. "We need sniper support on the main complex." "Moving to support Team 2, Santos replied. "Multiple casualties imminent if we don't break their contact immediately." She reached a position above Martinez and Williams, just as the enemy fighters were preparing to rush their location. Through her scope, she could see that both SEALs were wounded and running low on ammunition. Without immediate intervention, they would be overrun within minutes. Santos switched to rapid precision fire, dropping targets with the methodical efficiency that had made her legendary in special operations circles. Her shots were perfectly placed, each round finding its target despite the difficult angle and moving opponents. Within 90 seconds, she had eliminated 8 enemy fighters and forced the remainder to take cover. "Team 2, move now," she ordered. "I have you covered." Martinez and Williams bounded from their position toward better cover, with Santos providing covering fire that kept the remaining enemy fighters pinned down. Her shooting was so precise that she could place rounds within inches of the fleeing SEALs without any risk of hitting them. "Jesus Christ," Williams gasped as they reached safety. "Where did that shooting come from?" "Questions later," Santos replied curtly. "How bad are your wounds?" Both men had been hit, but neither injury was immediately life-threatening. Santos provided quick field treatment while maintaining overwatch on the enemy position, her hands working efficiently even while her attention remained focused on potential threats. "Team 1, what's your status?" she called to Roberts. "Building secured, 3 prisoners recovered, but Peterson needs immediate medical attention," came the reply. "And we've got more enemy fighters moving toward our position from the main defensive line." Santos made a rapid tactical assessment. The mission could still succeed, but only if someone coordinated the various elements and provided the kind of aggressive support that went far beyond normal medical duties. "All teams. This is Overwatch assuming tactical control," she announced, knowing that her next words would end any pretense about her background. "Team 1, prepare defensive positions around the prisoner building. Team 2, bound back to link up with Team 1 using Route Charlie. I'll provide covering fire and suppress the incoming enemy reinforcements. Overwatch, confirm you're assuming tactical control," Roberts replied, understanding the implications of what she was saying. "Confirmed," Santos responded, settling into a shooting position that gave her command of multiple approach routes. "I have operational experience with this type of complex engagement. Follow my directions and we all go home." For the next 20 minutes, Santos coordinated a fighting withdrawal that demonstrated tactical skills that impressed even veteran SEALs. She directed movement, called in supporting fire, and personally eliminated over a dozen enemy fighters, while ensuring that all team members reached the extraction point safely. As the helicopter lifted off with the rescued prisoners and wounded team members, Robert sat beside Santos and stared at her with something approaching awe. 18 confirmed kills in 20 minutes, he said quietly. Tactical coordination under extreme pressure. Command of complex multi-element operations. He shook his head. Who the hell are you really? Santos looked out the helicopter window at the mountain compound that was already disappearing behind them. I'm someone who made a promise to bring everyone home, she said simply. And I'm someone who learned a long time ago that sometimes keeping that promise requires skills they don't teach in medical school. Martinez, despite his wounds, leaned forward to join the conversation. That shooting wasn't just good, Santos. That was supernatural. I've been with special operations for 8 years and I've never seen anything like it. Santos met his gaze steadily. I had good teachers and a lot of practice in places you probably haven't heard of. Williams nodded slowly. So what do we call you now? Medic Santos or Operator Santos? For the first time since Roberts had known her. Santos smiled. Not the careful professional expression she usually wore, but a genuine smile that suggested she was finally comfortable with who she really was. Call me whatever feels right, she said, but understand that whether I'm treating your wounds or watching your back through a scope, I'm going to use every skill I have to make sure this team comes home safely. Roberts looked around at his team, wounded but alive, successful in their mission, and now fully aware that their quiet medic was one of the most dangerous operators any of them had ever worked with. From now on, he announced, Santos is cross-trained for both medical and tactical operations, because apparently, we've been wasting one hell of a resource. As the helicopter carried them back to base, Santos finally pulled out the worn photograph she had been carrying and showed it to the team. It was the picture of her original unit, including Jennifer Hayes taken before the ambush that had changed everything. This is why I do what I do, she said quietly. These people died believing in something bigger than themselves. Every mission we complete successfully, every life we save, every team member who makes it home. It's a way of honoring their sacrifice. The team looked at the photograph in respectful silence, finally understanding the depth of experience and loss that had shaped their medic into the extraordinary soldier they now knew her to be. Roberts realized that Maria Santos had spent months hiding not just her capabilities, but her commitment to ensuring that no one else would die the way her friends had died. She had transformed herself from a person seeking revenge into someone dedicated to protecting others, and in doing so, had become exactly the kind of soldier that every team leader hoped to find. As they approached the base, Roberts made a mental note to recommend Santos for the recognition she deserved. But he also knew that the most important recognition had already come from her teammates, who now understood that their quiet medic was someone who would literally move mountains to bring them home safely.